The rain had set in before twilight, a steady curtain that drummed against the panes of the Beresfords' modest sitting room in South Audley Street. It blurred the outlines of the opposite houses and streaked the lamplight outside into long, wavering trails. Inside, the fire snapped companionably, throwing pockets of warmth against the encroaching chill. Tuppence Beresford, legs tucked neatly beneath her, had ensconced herself in the corner of the sofa with a novel of questionable morals. Tommy, pipe in hand, was frowning over the evening paper, occasionally muttering about the price of tea or the state of the railways. There was nothing in the air to suggest mystery. If anything, the evening promised the sort of domestic comfort that middle age and marriage had made almost habitual. But as both Beresfords would later remark, mystery has a knack for arriving precisely when one has grown too comfortable. The doorbell rang, not a sharp rap of urgency, nor the hearty buzz of a neighbour, but a hesitant chime, as though the visitor had thought twice before committing to the action. Tuppence lowered her book, eyebrows lifting. "Tommy," she said, "who rings on a night like this? The milkman's long abed, and if it's a tradesman, I'll eat your pipe." Tommy folded the newspaper, rose with a reluctant grunt, and went to the door. A draught of rain-laden air swept in as he opened it, and for an instant he saw no one at all. Then, with the furtive shuffle of someone desperate to remain unseen, a figure extended a thin, gloved hand, pressed a long envelope into his grasp, and vanished into the dark. "Good Lord," Tommy murmured. He might have gone after the messenger, but the rain was thick as a curtain, and the street appeared utterly deserted. Closing the door, he examined the envelope. The paper was heavy, old-fashioned, and sealed with a blob of dark red wax, stamped with no crest, only a crude impression, as though pressed by a common button. Tuppence, curiosity piqued, had risen from the sofa. "Well, don't stand there as if you've been handed a cobra. Open it!" Tommy obeyed, sliding a finger beneath the seal. Inside was a single sheet of cream-coloured paper, the ink faintly smudged in places. The hand that had written it was spidery, crabbed with age, but the words were legible enough. He read aloud, "To whom it may concern, or perhaps to whom it dares, the cipher that could never be broken has at last yielded its secret. Not to the mighty engines of Bletchley, nor to the proud codebreakers of Whitehall, but to me, humble servant of forgotten texts. Yet the knowledge is not mine alone. Already I sense eyes upon me, hands that would snatch what they cannot understand. If you would preserve England from a greater betrayal than she has yet known, you must act swiftly. I cannot write more." The letter broke off, not with a signature, not even with a proper full stop, but with a jagged line of ink that trailed down as though the pen had slipped. There was a silence when Tommy finished, broken only by the persistent hiss of rain against the windows. "Well," said Tuppence crisply, "that sounds like the sort of nonsense that lands on our doorstep every 5 years or so. We'd better take it seriously." Tommy glanced at her. "Do you think it's a hoax?" "Darling, if it were a hoax, the messenger wouldn't have vanished like Banquo's ghost. No, I should say it's deadly earnest." She tapped the letter thoughtfully. "And rather badly written for a hoaxer." Tommy lowered himself into the armchair, pipe forgotten. The cipher that could never be broken. There were a few during the war, weren't there? Unbreakable codes, or so they claimed. "Yes," said Tuppence, "but this one seems to come with a body attached, if I'm any judge. Mark my words, whoever wrote this won't live long enough to regret it." Her words proved prophetic. The following morning, as grey mist lifted reluctantly from the city, the news broke in subdued columns of print. Obscure antiquarian found dead in Bloomsbury shop. Tommy and Tuppence read the notice together over breakfast. The description matched what they had suspected. The sender of the letter was a Mr. Algernon Sedgwick, dealer in rare manuscripts, known to precisely no one of consequence. His shop had been discovered locked from the inside. His body slumped across the desk. "Natural causes," said the constable. "Weak heart, probably." But the Beresfords, with the letter still lying on their mantelpiece, were not inclined to believe in coincidence. Tuppence pushed away her toast with a decisive snap. "There you have it, interrupted in the middle of a letter, dead by morning. If that isn't suspicious, then I'm the Queen of Sheba." Tommy frowned. "You're suggesting foul play?" "I'm suggesting," said Tuppence, rising from the table, "that we pay a call on Mr. Sedgwick's shop before Scotland Yard tidies it up and labels it uninteresting. If the letter is true, if some wartime cipher has been broken, it could be rather important. And if it's false, well, I should still like to know who wanted him silenced. The rain had not abated when they stepped out into the morning streets. The pavements gleamed slick, umbrellas jostled, and the air smelled of wet stone and petrol fumes. As they walked briskly toward Bloomsbury, Tommy reflected, not for the first time, that domestic peace never lasted long in their household. Tuppence, cheeks flushed with the promise of adventure, looked younger than her years. Sedgwick's shop was a narrow-fronted affair squeezed between a tobacconist and a dreary lodging-house. Its windows were cluttered with dusty tomes, faded maps, and the sort of curiosities only eccentric collectors would desire. A police constable stood outside, looking damp and thoroughly bored. Tommy showed the letter discreetly, and after some persuasion they were admitted. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old paper and candle grease. Shelves loomed precariously, stacked high with volumes that threatened to topple at the slightest nudge. Behind the counter, a small back room contained the desk where Sedgwick had met his end. The scene was eerily as though he had just stepped out. A pen lay on the blotter, its nib dried to a crust of black. An open book revealed columns of strange symbols, runic, half-deciphered, and on the floor, overlooked by the constable, lay a torn scrap of parchment bearing 3 lines of numbers. Tuppence stooped to pick it up. "Not much to look at," she murmured, "but I dare say people have killed for less." Tommy's jaw tightened. If this was indeed murder, we may be walking into rather more than we bargained for. "Yes," said Tuppence, eyes bright with anticipation. "Isn't it wonderful?" The constable cleared his throat reproachfully, but neither Beresford paid him any heed. For in that cramped, dusty room, with rain drumming steadily on the roof above, they both knew the game had begun. The fog was thicker the next day, lying low over London like a quilt pulled too tightly across the city. It muffled sound and smeared every outline, so that buses loomed out of the murk like scarlet ghosts and pedestrians appeared suddenly at one's elbow, faces pale beneath the lamplight. Tommy Beresford buttoned his overcoat against the damp, while Tuppence marched at his side with the air of a woman set on answers. They had left the antiquarian's shop with a sense of unresolved unease, the torn scrap of parchment hidden securely in Tuppence's handbag. Scotland Yard, as expected, had shown little enthusiasm for their interference, but the letter's unfinished urgency, coupled with Sedgwick's untimely death, was enough to keep the Beresfords moving forward. "Operation Willow," Tuppence said suddenly, breaking the silence of their walk. "I remember the name." Tommy glanced at her, surprised. "Do you? I thought all of that sort of thing was brushed under carpets once the war ended." "Not brushed," Tuppence corrected briskly. "Merely whispered. You forget, dear, that women heard more than men suspected during those years. I remember one of our girls in the ATS mentioning a file that had gone missing, something about a code the Germans thought unbreakable. They called it Willow. The higher-ups hushed it almost at once." Tommy frowned. "So our cipher might be tied to that?" "Very possibly, which is why you, my ex-intelligence husband, ought to make inquiries with someone who knows the old corridors." He sighed. "You make it sound so easy. My old corridors have a habit of closing doors in one's face." "Then you must find a door that opens," Tuppence retorted. "I suggest Major Anthony Merriweather. You served with him, didn't you?" Tommy's expression grew thoughtful. "Merriweather? Yes, a good fellow, though he always smelt faintly of cigars and secrecy. Very well, we'll start with him." The Red Hart pub crouched at the corner of a narrow alley, its windows fogged by years of smoke and condensation. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the scents of stout, fried onions and the lingering tang of pipe tobacco. Men huddled in booths spoke in low tones, their words lost beneath the clink of tankards and the muted thrum of a piano in the back. Tommy spotted his man at once. Major Merriweather had aged since the war, his once upright shoulders now stooped, but the keen intelligence in his eyes remained. He raised a bushy brow as Tommy approached, Tuppence at his side. "Beresford!" Merriweather's voice was gravelly but not unkind. "By Jove, I thought you'd retired to slippers and novels." "Not quite," Tommy said, shaking his hand. "This is my wife, Tuppence. You've heard of her exploits, no doubt." Merriweather chuckled. "Heard and admired. Sit, sit. What brings you to my den of iniquity?" They ordered ale, and when the pints arrived, Tommy leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I'm afraid it isn't a social call. Do you recall something called Operation Willow?" For a fleeting instant, Merryweather's expression froze. His joviality dimmed, replaced by caution. He took a long draught of ale before answering. "Where in blazes did you hear that name?" "From a dead man," Tuppence said coolly, producing the letter from her handbag. She laid it flat on the table, careful to shield it from prying eyes. Merryweather read it in silence. His fingers tapped against the wood, his mouth compressed. At length he spoke. "I shouldn't be telling you this, Beresford, but since you've already been dragged in, you may as well know. Willow was a cipher the Germans devised late in the war. We captured fragments, pages from codebooks, intercepted signals, but our best men couldn't break it. Not Turing, not his team. The thing was wrong, somehow. Structured but maddening, like a puzzle that shifted as you looked at it." "And the purpose of this Willow cipher," Tommy pressed. "No one ever knew," Merryweather said grimly. "We assumed troop movements or submarine positions, but the project was buried after the war. Officially, Willow never existed." Tuppence's eyes gleamed. "And yet someone has claimed to crack it now. Poor Mr. Sedgwick." Merryweather stiffened. "Sedgwick? That antiquarian fellow in Bloomsbury? He's dead, isn't he?" Tommy nodded. "Conveniently, yes." Merryweather lowered his voice to a growl. "Then you'd best tread carefully. If Willow is still in play, it means old ghosts haven't stayed buried, and some of those ghosts shoot before asking questions." A silence stretched between them, filled by the drone of the pub and the crackle of the fire in the grate. Then Merryweather slipped a hand into his pocket and produced a small notebook, worn at the edges. He laid it on the table. "Take this," he said softly. "It's nothing official, just my own jottings from back then. Numbers, fragments, half-erased attempts at translation. Might help you, or it might land you 6 feet under. Either way, I've had enough of it." Before Tommy could protest, Merryweather rose, downed the last of his pint, and left them staring at the notebook. His departure was abrupt, as though he feared being overheard. Outside, the fog seemed denser, curling around lampposts and swallowing figures whole. Tuppence clutched the notebook in her handbag as though it might sprout legs and run away. "Well," she said, "we've certainly stirred something. Did you notice the way he froze at the very word Willow?" "I did," Tommy admitted. "And he was frightened, Tuppence. That's not like Merryweather." They hailed a cab, its headlights dim cones in the gloom. As it rattled toward home, Tuppence leafed through the notebook by the meagre light. The pages were filled with cramped figures, columns of numbers, fragments of symbols, notes scrawled hastily and crossed out. One page caught her eye. She touched it with a gloved finger. "Look here, half erased, but it reads like a date, 11/3/44, and beneath it, meeting postponed, double agent." Tommy leaned closer. "That doesn't look promising. A postponed meeting and a suspected traitor. It fits too neatly into the notion of betrayal." "Or perhaps," Tuppence countered, "it was written to mislead anyone who found the notebook. Don't forget, spies are as fond of red herrings as fishermen." The cab dropped them at their doorstep. As they mounted the steps, Tuppence glanced sharply over her shoulder. A figure melted back into the fog, too far to distinguish. "Someone's following us," she murmured. Tommy's jaw tightened. Then Willow is alive indeed. Later, with the fire burning low and the curtains drawn tight, the Beresfords spread the notebook across their table. The numbers blurred, teasing and defiant. Each attempt at pattern dissolved into nonsense. Tuppence sat back with a sigh. "I hate ciphers, Tommy. Give me people any day. People leave traces. But numbers?" She gestured at the page. "They lie without even blinking." Tommy smiled faintly. "Then perhaps we'll solve this, not by brute force, but by human nature. Who wanted Willow suppressed? Who benefits if it resurfaces?" Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, a grey shroud concealing friend and foe alike. Inside, shadows flickered on the walls, and the half-erased numbers seemed to whisper of secrets best left buried. The cipher was no longer a curiosity. It was a living danger. Funerals, Tuppence reflected, were curious affairs. They drew together people who otherwise contrived never to meet, relatives who squabbled over inheritances, acquaintances bound by only the thinnest of ties, strangers who appeared mysteriously at the edge of the congregation, and beneath the solemn hymns and the shuffle of black crape, undercurrents ran: resentment, curiosity, fear. The antiquarian's funeral was held on a dreary morning in Bloomsbury, the sky the colour of pewter. A chill drizzle hung in the air, dampening veils and top hats alike. The little church, tucked between two grey terraces, had seen better days, but its Gothic arches lent a sombre dignity to the proceedings. Tommy and Tuppence, dressed with appropriate modesty, slipped into a pew near the back. Neither had known Algernon Sedgwick personally, but the letter on their mantle and the parchment scrap in Tuppence's handbag gave them reason enough to observe. The congregation was sparse, yet curiously varied. Tuppence, sharp-eyed as ever, took stock of them, while the vicar droned on about dust returning to dust. Nearest the coffin sat a young woman in a plain black frock, her hands twisting a handkerchief to shreds. Her features were attractive in a fragile way, though marred by anxiety. Tuppence leaned toward Tommy. "The niece," she whispered. "I asked the undertaker beforehand. Name of Clara. Lives in Hampstead, and according to our friend the undertaker, perpetually behind on her rent." Tommy nodded discreetly. "Debts, then. Always a strong motive." Behind Clara sat a man whose presence seemed faintly incongruous in that shabby church. He was tall, dark-haired, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit with a foreign cut. His shoes gleamed, a silver tie-pin winked at his throat. Most telling of all was the way his eyes flickered constantly from face to face, weighing, measuring. "Continental," Tuppence murmured, "and rather too interested in everyone else's grief. Notice how he keeps studying the coffin, as if he expects Sedgwick to sit up and reveal a secret." On the opposite side of the aisle slouched an elderly gentleman, his hair a wild thicket of white. He wore a coat that had once been military, but was now frayed at the cuffs, and his spectacles were perched precariously on his nose. His lips moved faintly as though he muttered to himself. Tommy recognised him with a jolt. "My word, that's Professor Alistair Finch, brilliant codebreaker during the war. Rumour had it he nearly solved Willow before they closed the file." Tuppence's eyebrows rose. "And now he turns up here. How very convenient." The service ended. The coffin was carried out into the drizzle, followed by the mourners. Tuppence and Tommy joined the slow procession to the graveyard behind the church. Gravestones leaned at odd angles, moss-covered and damp, the earth already soft with rain. At the graveside, the vicar intoned the final blessing. Earth thudded dully on the coffin. Clara stifled a sob, pressing her handkerchief to her lips. The foreign gentleman inclined his head with elegant gravity, while Professor Finch stared blankly into the hole as though working out an equation in his mind. As the mourners drifted into subdued conversation, Tuppence nudged Tommy. "Now is the time to circulate. Names, impressions, whispers. I'll observe. You charm." Tommy sighed but obeyed, setting off toward Clara with the air of a man who preferred spycraft to condolence. "Miss Sedgwick," he said gently, removing his hat, "I was so sorry to hear of your uncle's passing. Did you live with him?" Clara startled slightly, then shook her head. "No, Uncle Algernon. He valued solitude. I visited sometimes, not as often as I should have," her voice trembled. "He was kind, but difficult, always shut away with his books." Tommy gave her a sympathetic nod. "A man of secrets, then?" Her eyes flickered nervously. "Secrets, I suppose. But aren't all scholars like that? Always hiding things away in notes and papers?" Before Tommy could press further, the foreign gentleman approached with a smooth bow. "Permit me," he said in a low, accented voice, "to extend my sympathies. I'm Stefan Markov. I knew your uncle professionally. His expertise in rare manuscripts was well respected, even beyond England." His dark eyes gleamed as they rested on Clara, then on Tommy. "It is a loss not merely to family, but to history." Tommy noted the choice of words. History. Or perhaps secrets disguised as history. Markov excused himself with continental politeness, moving on to speak with the vicar. Clara bit her lip, then muttered, "I don't know who that man is. I never saw him at the shop." Meanwhile, Tuppence had manoeuvred herself near Professor Finch, who stood muttering into his beard while poking at a gravestone with his cane. "Professor Finch?" she said brightly. He blinked at her, as though surfacing from some mental calculation. "Eh? Do I know you?" "No," Tuppence said, "but I've heard of you. Cipher work, wasn't it? During the war." His eyes sharpened. Yes, though no one remembers it now. All forgotten, buried, like Sedgwick there." He jerked his cane toward the grave. "But I remember. Codes that twisted the mind. Willow. They laughed when I said it wasn't solvable, but I knew. A trap. A trick." Tuppence tilted her head. "Did you know Mr. Sedgwick well?" Finch snorted. "Knew him, hardly. He begged me for scraps. Came to me with talk of Willow, said he'd found pieces, asked for help. I told him to burn it all. Too dangerous. But he wouldn't listen." His muttering resumed. "Wouldn't listen. And now he's dead. They'll come for the rest, you'll see." Tuppence's skin prickled. "Who will come, Professor?" But Finch had lapsed back into inaudible mumbling, staring through the drizzle with eyes clouded by old obsession. Later, as the mourners dispersed into the damp streets, Tommy and Tuppence lingered in the small church garden. The yew trees dripped steadily, and the smell of wet earth clung to their clothes. "That was enlightening," Tommy remarked. "Clara Sedgwick with her debts, the mysterious Markov sniffing about manuscripts, and Finch warning us to burn everything. A veritable rogues' gallery." Tuppence frowned. And yet, none of them seemed surprised that Algernon is gone. Clara was nervous, yes, but not shocked. Markov is altogether too composed. And Finch, well, half the time he seemed to be talking to ghosts. They walked slowly beneath the dripping trees. As they turned the corner, voices reached them, low, urgent, carried by the mist. Tommy gestured for silence. They crept closer, crouching behind a hedge. It was Markov, his accent sharper now, speaking to an unseen companion. "He must have told someone before the end," Markov hissed. "I pressed him, but he resisted. Foolish man. Now we must find who else knows. The cipher cannot fall into their hands." A murmured reply came, indistinct. Then footsteps receded quickly down the garden path. Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a glance. "Well," Tuppence whispered, eyes alight. "That settles it. Poor Sedgwick didn't die of natural causes at all. He was pressured to reveal something about Willow." Tommy's jaw set grimly. "And someone here is still determined to have it." The drizzle thickened into steady rain. As they left the churchyard, the Beresfords knew the funeral had been less a farewell to the dead than a curtain-raiser for the living drama to come. The suspects had gathered, and somewhere among them, hidden by polite condolences and dripping umbrellas, lay the key to a cipher, and perhaps to another death. The antiquarian's shop was quieter now, though the air retained that faintly oppressive scent of old parchment, candle grease, and damp stone. A notice pinned to the front door announced closure until further notice, but Tommy had always been adept at keys, literal and otherwise. With a discreet word to a sympathetic constable and a borrowed brass instrument that looked suspiciously like a skeleton key, the Beresfords gained admittance once dusk had settled over Bloomsbury. The place seemed to sigh as they entered, the floorboards groaning beneath their steps. Dust motes hung in the lamplight like lazy fireflies. Shelves rose precariously, sagging under the weight of atlases and forgotten chronicles. In the back, beyond a curtain heavy with the smell of mildew, lay Sedgwick's study. Tuppence wrinkled her nose. He must have lived in perpetual gloom. No wonder his handwriting looked spidery. He probably hadn't seen daylight in years. Tommy adjusted the wick of the lamp. Men like Sedgwick thrive on shadows. It makes them feel indispensable. The desk sat squat and stubborn against the wall, its surface cluttered with ink pots, curling maps, and slips of paper scribbled over with undecipherable notes. Yet it was the locked drawer on the right-hand side that drew Tommy's eye. The lock gleamed faintly, as if recently handled. "Well," he murmured, kneeling, "we might as well test our luck." With a practiced motion, he slid the thin pick into place. The lock clicked obligingly, and the drawer slid open with a reluctant groan. Inside, wrapped in a strip of oilcloth, lay a piece of parchment no larger than a folded letter. Tuppence leaned over his shoulder. "Careful," she whispered, as though afraid to wake the dead. Tommy unwrapped the cloth. The parchment revealed a series of symbols scrawled in dark ink, half resembling ancient runes, half the clipped shorthand of wartime signals. The juxtaposition was jarring, as though someone had stitched together centuries of cryptography into one indecipherable fabric. Tuppence frowned. Runes. And numbers? Or no, not quite numbers. Shorthand, perhaps. It looks like someone tried to graft the old onto the new. Tommy traced the symbols with a cautious finger. Sedgwick must have copied this from somewhere. An original document, perhaps. Or several. Whatever Willow was, this is a piece of it. The study seemed to lean closer around them, the lamplight thickening into pools of shadow. A floorboard creaked, not beneath their own weight, but faintly, from the shop beyond. Tuppence stiffened. "Tommy," she whispered, "we're not alone." He set the parchment back into the oilcloth, sliding it swiftly into his breast pocket. The two of them moved soundlessly to the study door. The outer shop lay empty, rows of books staring blankly into the gloom. Yet the air felt disturbed, as though a presence had slunk away only moments before. "Imagination?" Tommy murmured. Tuppence shook her head. "Instinct, and my instincts are rarely wrong." They left the shop with an uneasy sense of eyes pressing at their backs. Outside, the mist had thickened into a yellowish fog that clung to the lamplight and blurred the outlines of passing figures. Twice, Tuppence thought she glimpsed a shape lingering across the street, only for it to dissolve when she looked directly. By the time they returned home, nerves prickled at every sound. Albert, their imperturbable helper, had left supper warming, but the Beresfords had little appetite. Instead, they sat by the fire, the parchment unfolded between them on the low table. Tuppence studied it in silence, chin in hand. "It has the flavour of a trap, doesn't it? Too carefully jumbled, too deliberately obscure. And if Sedgwick copied it, then someone else possesses the original. That would explain the urgency of his letter." Tommy puffed thoughtfully at his pipe. "And his sudden death. If he had more pieces than this one scrap, they're missing. But whoever searched his study must have overlooked this drawer." Or, Tuppence countered, they knew exactly what they wanted, and took only that, leaving this as bait. The thought silenced them both. The fire crackled merrily, at odds with the chill threading through the room. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Night deepened. Tuppence, restless, checked the locks twice before retiring. Tommy lingered in the sitting room, rereading Merriweather's notebook beside the enigmatic parchment. The numbers and symbols taunted him, refusing all logic. At last, fatigue won. He set both items on the desk, extinguished the lamp, and went to bed. It was the crash of glass that woke them. Tommy sprang upright, dragging on his dressing gown. Tuppence, already at the door, hissed, "Downstairs!" They descended swiftly, footsteps muffled on the carpeted stairs. The sitting room was chaos. A window had been forced open, shards glittering across the carpet. Papers lay strewn from the desk, drawers yanked half open. The fire, left banked low, cast a sullen glow over the disarray. Tommy darted forward. The parchment! Gone! Tuppence snatched up the notebook instead, relief flooding her face. This, at least, remains. Whoever it was, they wanted one thing only. They searched quickly, but the intruder had vanished as silently as they came. No footprints, no sign of departure beyond the broken glass. A professional job, Tommy thought grimly. Tuppence folded her arms. "Well, darling, it seems our instincts were correct. We were being watched. They followed us from the shop, waited for us to tire, and then struck." "Which suggests," Tommy added, "that we are already in far deeper than we imagined. Whoever they are, they now hold a critical piece of Willow." He straightened the desk with deliberate calm, though his hands itched for pursuit. "And yet, something troubles me. The parchment I found was in my pocket. I removed it before supper." He drew it forth with a flourish. Tuppence gasped. "Then what did they take?" They scanned the room again. The missing item was not immediately obvious. At last Tuppence noticed the gap on the mantel. "The letter," she whispered. "Sedgwick's letter. The original one we received." Tommy's face hardened. Of course. It named Willow, suggested he had cracked it. More incriminating than parchment scribbles, and now it's in enemy hands. They tidied the room enough to discourage Fritz's alarm come morning, then sat once more by the guttering fire. Tuppence's expression was thoughtful rather than fearful. "Curious, isn't it?" she mused. "They left everything else. Merryweather's notes, your files, even the few jewels I forgot in my drawer. They wanted only the letter, which tells me that the parchment you still have is more valuable than they realized, or more dangerous." Tommy nodded. "Either way, the stakes are rising. Tomorrow we retrace Sedgwick's connections. Someone close to him knows more, and if they think to frighten us off, they'll discover we're not so easily shaken." Tuppence smiled, though her eyes were sharp. "Quite right. After all, darling, what's a bit of burglary between friends?" The clock struck midnight, solemn and unhurried. Outside, the fog pressed close, hiding the city in its damp embrace. Inside, two determined figures sat plotting, the scrap of cipher parchment lying between them like a silent third companion. Neither spoke, the thought that lingered uncomfortably in both minds, that Sedgwick's death was only the beginning, and that the cipher, half ancient, half modern, was already weaving its dangerous net around them. The days that followed were thick with fog, as if London itself conspired to blur the edges of truth. The city seemed to shrink beneath its yellow pall, muffled and uncertain. It suited Tommy's mood precisely. He sat at the dining table one morning with the cipher spread before him, Merryweather's notebook open to a page of jottings, and a stub of pencil clenched between his fingers. The fire crackled, tea steamed gently at his elbow, but his thoughts were caught fast in the web of runes and shorthand symbols. "Blast it," he muttered. "It shifts like quicksand. Every time I think I see a pattern, it collapses." From the sofa, Tuppence, comfortably wrapped in a shawl, watched with half-amused sympathy. "Darling, ciphers are like women. They don't yield to brute force. You must coax them, flatter them, perhaps even ignore them until they demand attention." Tommy chuckled despite himself. That advice sounds suspiciously like experience. "Of course," Tuppence said with a glint. "I married you, didn't I?" He gave up the pencil and leaned back, rubbing his temples. Perhaps Finch was right. It isn't meant to be solved. It's a lure, a trick to catch traitors. Or perhaps, she countered, it hides something so dangerous that only madness kept it from being cracked. Either way, someone thinks it worth killing for. Her words hung in the air, heavy as the fog outside. That afternoon they ventured out, intending to consult an old contact of Tommy's in Whitehall. The fog lay thick along Park Lane, and as their cab rolled slowly through it, Tuppence noticed a dark saloon trailing them at an unnatural distance. "Tommy," she said quietly, "we are being followed." He lifted the cab's little rear window, glanced back, and closed it again. "Yes, Black Wolseley, 2 lamps on. Same car that idled near our corner yesterday." "Shall we lead them a merry chase?" Tuppence suggested, her eyes brightening. But Tommy shook his head. "Not yet. Better to know we're watched than to lose them altogether. Whoever it is may slip." The car shadowed them until they reached Whitehall, then slid smoothly past as though uninterested. Still, its presence lingered like a threat. Inside the drab corridors of the ministry, they found little cheer. Tommy's former colleague was polite but evasive, insisting that Operation Willow remained classified and that no useful purpose could be served by dredging it up. His hands trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette. "Forget it, Beresford," he urged, "for your own sake. Some codes were designed not merely to guard secrets, but to bury them." When they emerged once more into the fog, Tuppence slipped her arm through Tommy's. Well, that was fruitless, except for confirming that Willow terrifies even bureaucrats, which is encouraging in its way. That night, unease became reality. They returned home late, the fog damp on their coats. Fritz had retired, leaving the house quiet. Yet as Tuppence pushed open the door to the sitting room, she froze. The scent was wrong, cold air, dust disturbed. Tommy followed quickly, his eyes narrowing. Drawers stood open. Papers lay scattered on the carpet. The window latch was splintered. Tuppence whispered, "Again." They searched cautiously, but nothing obvious had been taken. The cipher parchment was still concealed in its hiding place. Merryweather's notebook lay undisturbed, and the small household safe had not been touched. "Curious," Tommy murmured. "A burglar who takes nothing, unless he found what he came for without our knowing." Tuppence bent to straighten the papers, her hands steady though her heart raced. "Or he came to frighten us, to remind us we're not alone in this game." She looked up suddenly. "Tommy, what if it's deliberate? They want us nervous, distracted, break our confidence before we make progress." He nodded slowly. "Psychological warfare, old as the hills." But he said nothing of the prickling unease that lingered with him long after they had restored order, nor of the faint impression, barely a shadow, that someone had stood at the foot of the stairs, listening, waiting. The following morning, Tommy's suspicion turned to flesh. They had scarcely finished breakfast when the post brought a plain envelope, unstamped, slipped under the door by some invisible hand. Inside lay a single sheet with 6 symbols copied neatly in ink, the same style as their parchment, but reversed, mirror-like, as though mocking them. Beneath, a single line scrawled in haste, "Not for you, leave it buried." Tuppence read it aloud, then laughed, though the sound held no mirth. "How obliging! A warning in black and white. Almost courteous, don't you think?" "Courteous murderers are the most dangerous," Tommy said grimly. His thoughts turned to an old rival from his intelligence days, Colonel Desmond Harcourt, a man brilliant in codes, ruthless in methods, and never above intimidation. Harcourt had once lost out on a commendation thanks to Tommy's intervention. He had never forgiven it. "It fits," Tommy muttered. "The stalking, the games, the warning. Harcourt always did relish a contest." Tuppence considered. "Perhaps, but don't let an old grudge blind you. Harcourt may be guilty of arrogance, but that doesn't prove he's behind this." Still, the thought gnawed at Tommy, shaping his steps that day as he made discreet inquiries. He discovered Harcourt had indeed resurfaced recently in London, seen at clubs and society dinners. But evidence, real evidence, remained elusive. Suspense grew like ivy around their days. The Wolseley appeared again, idling across the street. Once, returning from an errand, Tuppence swore she saw a figure slip away from their doorway. At night, small noises disturbed the silence, a floorboard creaking, a latch rattling. Albert remained imperturbable, but even he admitted once to glimpsing a man loitering at the corner before vanishing into the fog. "I don't like it," Tommy said one evening, pacing the sitting room. "This is no longer academic. We're being herded, manipulated. They want us rattled." Tuppence sipped her tea with calm determination. "Then we must remain unrattled. If they are watching us, let us give them a performance worth watching." She tapped the cipher parchment. "We continue the work. That will annoy them more than anything." And so they did, though progress was elusive. Tommy tried transpositions, substitutions, even recalling old wartime machines. Tuppence, with intuition rather than mathematics, suggested treating the runes as pictograms, the shorthand as modifiers. Nothing held. Each path led to contradiction. "Perhaps it requires both," Tuppence mused late one night. "Ancient and modern together. A code of codes." Tommy rubbed his eyes. "Or perhaps it's gibberish, as Finch claimed." But even he could not quite believe that. One evening, the fog lay particularly dense, turning street lamps into blurred halos. The Beresfords had been out for a walk, ostensibly to clear their heads, in truth to see if the Wolseley would follow. It did. They stopped abruptly outside a tobacconist's, then stepped quickly into a narrow alley. The car rolled past slowly, headlights probing the mist, but did not stop. "Too clever by half," Tuppence whispered. "They'll circle back." Sure enough, when they emerged a few streets later, the Wolseley had returned. It kept a steady pace behind them, unhurried, confident. Tommy felt his temper flare. "I've had enough of this." He hailed a passing cab. "Get in, Tuppence." The cab jolted away, the Wolseley following. But when Tommy instructed the driver to make a series of abrupt turns, first left, then right, then looping around, the Wolseley stayed close, too close to be coincidence. At last, Tommy had the driver stop sharply by Hyde Park. He leapt out, striding toward the Wolseley. But before he reached it, the car accelerated with a roar and vanished into the fog. He stood breathing hard, fists clenched. Tuppence joined him, calm as ever. "Satisfied, darling?" "No," he admitted. "But at least we know. This is deliberate, orchestrated, and they are frightened enough to reveal themselves." Back home, exhaustion and tension pressed at them, yet resolve grew stronger. Tuppence laid the parchment carefully in its hiding place, then turned to Tommy with a wry smile. "You see, dear, this is no longer about a puzzle on paper. It's about the living hands that want to keep it hidden. The cipher is merely bait. And we, Tommy said grimly, are the fish. She slipped her hand through his arm. Then let us be clever fish, and not snap too soon. The fire burned low, the house quieted. Yet outside, the fog swirled, carrying unseen footsteps, unseen eyes. Danger no longer lurked in shadows. It moved openly now, danger in plain sight. The invitation arrived 2 days after the break-in. Its vellum paper bore a crest neither Beresford immediately recognized, an austere stag's head flanked by oak leaves. The handwriting was precise, almost military. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, it read, "Your names have been recommended to us in connection with matters of national importance. We request the honour of your presence at Greystone Manor this Friday evening, where a private discussion shall be held regarding the cipher known as Willow. Discretion is expected. Transportation will be provided." The signature was nothing more than an initial R. Tuppence laid the letter down with a flourish. "Well, darling, it seems we are to be summoned like minor royalty. How very cloak and dagger." Tommy frowned. "Or like bait to a trap. Still, refusing would be more suspicious than attending. Whoever R is, they already know far too much." And so, when Friday came, the Beresfords allowed themselves to be carried by a chauffeur-driven Daimler out of London, through winding lanes lined with skeletal winter trees, and at last to the looming silhouette of Greystone Manor. The house rose from the mist like something out of a Gothic tale, stone walls weathered and ivy-clad, turrets jutting into the night sky, windows glinting faintly in the lamplight. A storm had been threatening all evening, and as they arrived, the first drops of rain spattered against the flagstones. Inside, the great hall was lit only by tall candles set in sconces along the panelled walls. Their flames flickered, throwing wavering shadows over portraits of grim ancestors. The effect was more theatrical than welcoming. A butler, thin as a poker and nearly as expressionless, relieved them of their coats and announced them into the drawing-room. There, gathered in clusters beneath the swaying light of candelabra, stood 6 figures, each stranger, yet instantly recognizable as types to anyone who had ever served in wartime intelligence. At the centre of the room stood their host, Sir Reginald Fortescue, once a high-ranking civil servant, now grey-haired, hawk-nosed and still radiating authority. His eyes flickered to the Beresfords with faint impatience. "Ah, the late arrivals, do come in." Tuppence offered her brightest smile. "How perfectly atmospheric, Sir Reginald. All these candles, one might think you were staging a séance." A ripple of uneasy laughter passed among the guests. Introductions were made. Besides Sir Reginald, there was Lady Eleanor Drayton, tall and severe, who had worked on wartime communications and whose tongue was as sharp as her profile. Professor Finch, the muttering codebreaker they had seen at the funeral, lurked in a corner, spectacles gleaming. Opposite him, leaning lazily against the mantelpiece, was Colonel Desmond Harcourt, Tommy's old rival, his smug smile every bit as irritating as memory recalled. Rounding out the company were Markov, the suave foreigner, and Clara Sedgwick, the niece, looking pale and nervous among such august company. Tuppence whispered to Tommy, "A merry band of ghosts indeed, and all gathered for Willow." Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "We are met tonight," he declared, "because the matter of Willow has resurfaced in a most disquieting fashion. Algernon Sedgwick's death may or may not be coincidence, but the fragments he held are of grave importance. We must decide how to proceed." The words seemed to unlock years of buried tension. Lady Eleanor sniffed. "Proceed? We should have destroyed the fragments decades ago. The very existence of Willow is a threat. Men have killed for less." Harcourt's smile deepened. "Ah, but some of us devoted years to cracking it. Are we to discard our labours so lightly? I, for one, believe the code hides something of tangible value. Perhaps enemy gold shipments, perhaps secrets still worth exploiting." Professor Finch let out a bark of laughter. "Exploit? Ha! You mean profit, Harcourt. You always wanted glory, even when others paid the price. Willow was never solvable. It was bait. Bait for traitors." "Convenient theory," Harcourt sneered. "Saves you admitting you failed." "Gentlemen, please," Sir Reginald snapped, though his own face showed unease. Tuppence leaned close to Tommy. You see, old rivalries never die, they only grow dustier. The argument swelled, voices overlapping, accusations flung like daggers. Lady Eleanor accused Finch of misplacing vital documents. Finch accused Harcourt of leaking information to foreign contacts. Harcourt, unperturbed, hinted darkly that Sir Reginald himself had buried Willow not out of prudence but to cover up a mistake. Clara sat silent, twisting her gloves in her lap, eyes darting nervously. Markov, by contrast, prowled the edges of the gathering like a cat, saying little but watching everything. At last Tuppence raised her voice lightly, yet with precision. "Forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, but surely the question is not what Willow meant in the past, but what it threatens in the present. Sedgwick died for something, and someone here knows more than they admit." The room chilled at her words. Candles flickered as though stirred by a hidden draught. Sir Reginald rapped his cane sharply on the floor. "Enough. We are not here to relitigate ancient quarrels. We are here to ensure that Willow does not fall into the wrong hands." But the undercurrent of mistrust remained, thick and unyielding. As the evening wore on, supper was served, though few ate much. The long oak table was set with silver candlesticks and heavy porcelain, but conversation was strained. Every clink of cutlery seemed magnified in the silence. Tuppence, feigning nonchalance, let her gaze wander. It was then she noticed movement beyond the French doors leading to the terrace. A shadow flitted across the glass, gone before she could call attention to it. Later, as the guests drifted back into the drawing-room, she saw something else. Lady Eleanor's bag had been left carelessly on a chair. From it protruded the corner of an envelope, thick, yellowed, unmistakably old. And at that precise moment, Markov slipped behind the chair, fingers quick as a pickpocket's. He drew the envelope free and tucked it inside his coat before vanishing toward the corridor. Tuppence's breath caught. She glanced at Tommy, but he was deep in brittle conversation with Harcourt. Without hesitation, she followed Markov into the shadows. The corridor was dim, lit only by wall sconces. Markov moved swiftly, almost silently, toward a side chamber. Tuppence kept her distance, her heels muffled by the thick carpet. He entered the chamber and shut the door. Tuppence waited, then edged closer. Through a narrow gap, she saw him open the envelope. Inside lay a second fragment of parchment, covered with the same hybrid script, runes interlaced with wartime shorthand. Her heart quickened. Another piece of Willow. She pressed back against the wall as footsteps approached. The butler, carrying a tray of decanters. He passed without suspicion. When Tuppence looked again, the chamber door was ajar. The envelope was gone. Returning to the drawing-room, she found Tommy disengaging from Harcourt with visible relief. She drew him aside, her voice low but urgent. "Markov has it," she whispered. "A second fragment. He took it from Lady Eleanor's bag." Tommy's eyes hardened. "Then the game has escalated. Sedgwick's piece was not unique. There are more, and Markov is collecting them." They exchanged a glance. Around them the guests still bickered beneath the candlelight, each guarding secrets, each suspecting the other. None seemed aware that the cipher they feared was already slipping through their hands. As thunder rolled outside and rain lashed against the windows, the Beresfords knew the night at Greystone Manor was far from over. For somewhere in the candlelit shadows, a fragment of Willow had changed hands, and the danger had deepened. The storm raged all night. Wind rattled the windows of Greystone Manor, rain hammered the leaded panes, and the old house groaned like a ship straining at anchor. Inside, the guests of Sir Reginald Fortescue lay uneasy in their appointed chambers, haunted by arguments left unresolved, suspicions whispered behind locked doors, and the knowledge that the cipher of Willow, whether myth or menace, was once again in play. Tommy and Tuppence slept little. Tuppence's mind replayed the sight of Markov slipping that yellowed envelope into his coat. Tommy's thoughts lingered on Harcourt's smug insinuations and Finch's frantic warnings. At 3:30, a floorboard creaked outside their room, and both of them stirred, instantly awake. But when Tommy opened the door, the corridor was empty, shadows trembling in candlelight. Morning brought no peace. The storm had eased to a steady drizzle, mist clinging low across the grounds. Fritz would have shuddered at the breakfast offered: lukewarm porridge, bread a day old, coffee bitter as regret. Yet no one seemed inclined to complain. The guests gathered with hollow eyes in the dining hall, voices subdued. Sir Reginald presided grimly at the head of the table. It was Lady Eleanor who noticed first. "Where is Harcourt?" she demanded, her sharp voice slicing through the murmur. A butler, his expression tighter than usual, bent to whisper in Sir Reginald's ear. The old man's face hardened. He rose, his cane striking sharply against the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said gravely, "Colonel Harcourt has been found dead in the library." The effect was electric. Clara gasped, her teacup clattering against the saucer. Finch muttered a frantic prayer beneath his breath. Markov's eyebrows rose in studied surprise, though his eyes gleamed too brightly. Tuppence felt a chill run down her spine. Tommy exchanged a look with her, then followed Sir Reginald and the butler down the corridor. The library was a cavernous room lined with bookshelves that climbed nearly to the ceiling. Heavy curtains still shrouded the tall windows, and the air smelled faintly of leather, dust, and damp wool. On the hearthrug, sprawled unnaturally in his armchair, lay Colonel Harcourt. His face was tinged with a sickly blue, his lips drawn back as though in a final sneer. On the table beside him stood a delicate porcelain teacup, a faint ring of poison swirling in the dregs. The butler murmured, "He was alive when I brought the tray, sir. 8:15. I returned just now to clear away, and—" He swallowed hard. "Poison," Sir Reginald said curtly, leaning heavily on his cane. "The manor is unmistakable." Tommy bent to examine the cup. "Curious. Only one used, though the pot holds more. He poured his own, perhaps?" Tuppence moved closer, scanning the room. "Or someone poured for him, and was careful which cup he received." Sir Reginald turned sharply. "This is no time for speculation. We must contain this." His eyes swept the shelves, the high windows, the locked doors. "No one leaves until the authorities arrive." The words fell like a sentence. The guests were gathered in the drawing-room once more, this time under a pall of fear. Lady Eleanor stood stiff-backed, indignation masking unease. Clara wept softly into her handkerchief, her nerves near breaking. Finch paced, muttering incoherently, while Markov lounged in his chair with infuriating composure. Sir Reginald's voice cut through the tension. "Colonel Harcourt has been murdered. Until this matter is resolved, the house is secured. No one may depart, no one may communicate beyond these walls. We are trapped together until the truth emerges." Clara let out a sob. "But surely it might have been an accident. Some illness." "Accident," Lady Eleanor snapped, "with poison swirling in his cup. Do not be a fool, child." Markov interjected smoothly. "Let us not leap to blame. Poison may come from many hands, intentional or negligent." "Negligent?" Finch's voice cracked. "Do you mean me? Always I am blamed, always. But I tell you, Harcourt had it coming. He trafficked with enemies, yes, but I did not kill him." His words hung, damning by their very fervour. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged quick glances. It was clear panic was spreading faster than reason. They must observe carefully. Tuppence, her tone deceptively light, said, "Curious, isn't it, that the Colonel should die the very morning after such lively debate about Willow? One might almost think the cipher itself demanded a sacrifice." Silence fell. Eyes darted, hands clenched. Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "Enough of this morbid talk. Let us speak plainly. Harcourt is dead. The cipher fragments, what remains of them, must be secured before more blood is spilled." But when he requested them, the truth emerged with dreadful clarity. Lady Eleanor's envelope was gone. Markov professed astonishment. Clara swore she had never possessed a fragment at all. Finch raved that his notes had been stolen from his valise in the night, and though Tommy quietly checked his own pocket, the parchment he and Tuppence had kept so carefully was still present. 3 fragments once known, now only 1 in their possession. The hours dragged on. Servants moved silently through the halls, their eyes lowered, yet the Beresfords sensed they heard more than they showed. Locked doors creaked, shadows pulled in corners. Whispered conferences erupted in the corridors, cut short when others approached. At luncheon, scarcely touched, Clara stammered that she had heard footsteps in the small hours near her chamber. Finch accused Markov of creeping through the halls. Markov smiled and denied nothing, which in itself was worse than admission. By late afternoon, the manor had grown oppressive, the storm clouds pressing low, candles guttering despite closed windows. Tuppence felt it keenly. "It's like being trapped in a mousetrap with the spring half down," she murmured to Tommy. "We know the killer is here, but we cannot see the hand that struck." Tommy squeezed her arm. "Then we must look not at the strike, but at the ripples it left. Harcourt quarrelled with all of them, yes. But who feared exposure most? Who gains by his silence?" They returned to the library to search more closely. The fire had burned low, the air chilled. Tommy examined the tea service. 3 cups, 2 untouched. He sniffed the dregs, recoiled at the bitter almond tang. "Cyanide," he said grimly. "Quick, certain, unmistakable." Tuppence scanned the shelves, her eyes narrowing. "And look here, this book, pulled partly free." She tugged it out. A hollowed space had been carved into the pages, lined with cloth, empty. Tommy whistled softly. A hiding place, perhaps for documents, fragments, or poison. The evidence mounted. Harcourt's death was not an isolated act of malice. It was entwined with Willow, its fragments, and the fear or greed they inspired. Evening descended again, with thunder rumbling distantly. Sir Reginald insisted all guests remain in the drawing-room together, under watch of his butler. The atmosphere was suffocating. Lady Eleanor sat rigid, her fingers drumming on the arm of her chair. Clara shivered, pale as the mist outside. Finch muttered equations under his breath, pacing ceaselessly. Markov lit a cigarette, the glow of its tip flaring like a beacon in the dimness. Tuppence whispered to Tommy, "Look at them. A tableau of guilt. Each conceals something, each suspects the others, and somewhere in this little theatre sits a murderer." Tommy murmured back, "Then let us watch the curtain carefully. Murderers rarely keep their masks intact for long." Hours later, the body of Harcourt was removed at last by the local constable, summoned discreetly. Yet even the arrival of officialdom did little to pierce the tension. The constable, a stolid country fellow, muttered of cyanide and shook his head. "This will take more than my notes, sir. Scotland Yard will have to come." But, until Yard detectives arrived, Greystone Manor remained sealed, its occupants unwilling prisoners of suspicion. As night drew once more across the rain-swept windows, Tommy and Tuppence sat close together by the fire. "2 deaths now," Tuppence said softly. "Sedgwick, Harcourt, both connected to Willow, and yet the fragments scatter further with each hour." Tommy nodded. "This is no longer an academic curiosity. We are caught in a deadly game, and the killer is among us still, waiting, watching, perhaps planning the next move." A log cracked in the grate, startling Clara into another sob. Finch muttered. Markov exhaled smoke with serene indifference. Lady Eleanor's eyes glittered like knives. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the spring of the trap to snap shut. The morning after Harcourt's death dawned grey and sullen, as though the storm clouds had no wish to depart. Rain still clung to the panes of Greystone Manor, blurring the view of sodden lawns and skeletal trees. The house felt heavier than before, its corridors hushed, the servants moving like ghosts, their faces carefully composed, yet eyes too bright with curiosity and fear. Tommy, restless, rose early and found Sir Reginald pacing the long gallery, lined with ancestral portraits. The old man looked more haggard than ever, his cane striking the tiles with sharp impatience. "We are adrift, Beresford," he muttered. "The Yard will come, yes, but by then the fragments may be scattered to the 4 winds. I tell you, Willow was buried for a reason. It must never be revived." "Then we must learn why it was buried," Tommy replied quietly. "Secrets are only dangerous in shadows. Bring them to light, and we may rob them of power." Sir Reginald gave a humourless laugh. "You sound like Tuppence. Perhaps you two will succeed where the rest of us failed." Later that day, Tommy travelled alone to London under the pretext of fetching documents. The train carried him through mist and drizzle, carriages nearly empty, his reflection faint in the rain-smeared glass. He carried with him Merryweather's notebook and the single fragment of cipher, tucked deep inside his coat. His destination was the records department, a drab brick building tucked behind Whitehall, its windows perpetually clouded, its corridors echoing with the shuffle of clerks and the smell of dust and ink. He presented an old clearance token and was admitted, though with suspicious looks. Inside the archives, the air was heavy with age. Files bulged from shelves tied with faded ribbons, labels yellowed. A single electric bulb flickered overhead, its hum mingling with the rustle of papers. Tommy felt the past crowding close, as though every whisper of espionage lingered in these walls. He requested files on Operation Willow. Predictably, most were marked classified or had pages missing altogether. Yet buried in an unassuming box, he found something peculiar, a series of wartime memoranda warning of fabricated intercepts. One note, scrawled in a hand he half recognized, stated, "Disseminate false documents regarding Willow. Purpose, to identify leaks among code-breaking staff." Tommy frowned. False leads planted deliberately, then some of what we hold may be deliberate nonsense. The realization chilled him. It meant not every scrap of Cipher was genuine. Some fragments were poison bait for traitors. The danger lay in discerning which was which, before someone stitched them together into deadly lies. Meanwhile, at Greystone, Tuppence had chosen a different path. While Tommy delved into the archives, she remained behind to observe the undercurrents of the household. She found the servants gathered in the scullery, polishing silver that hardly needed it, their voices lowered. When she entered, conversation ceased abruptly, but Tuppence, with her customary blend of charm and persistence, soon coaxed them back into talk. It was the housemaid Alice who finally leaned closer, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. "Beg pardon, ma'am, but I heard them quarrelling. The gentleman, Colonel Harcourt, and that foreign one, Mr. Markov, in the library late. I was passing with the coal scuttle and I couldn't help but hear. They spoke of a code that could bring nations to ruin, they said, and Mr. Harcourt swore he would never let it fall into enemy hands. Then Mr. Markov laughed. Oh, it was a terrible laugh, and he said the code already belonged to the highest bidder." Tuppence's eyes sharpened. "You're certain of this?" Alice nodded earnestly. "Yes, ma'am, but when they saw me in the doorway, they went quiet. I hurried away. I did, but I've not slept easy since." Tuppence pressed her hand. "You've done the right thing, Alice. Keep it to yourself for now." As she returned along the corridor, Tuppence pondered the implications. Markov bartering secrets, Harcourt posturing as guardian, and yet Harcourt was the one lying cold in the ground. Had Markov silenced him, or had someone else feared exposure and struck first? By evening, Tommy had returned, his eyes alight with discovery. Over supper, stew and bread, made palatable only by hunger, he and Tuppence shared their findings in hushed tones by the fire. "False leads," Tommy said grimly. "Some fragments are fabricated, designed to trap traitors. It means our parchment could be real, or a deadly decoy." Tuppence told him of Alice's overheard quarrel. If Markov truly boasted of selling the code, then he must believe at least part of it genuine, which suggests he possesses more than one fragment. Or, Tommy mused, he wants us to believe that. They were silent a moment, the fire crackling between them. Then Tuppence's eyes strayed to the shelves in the drawing room. Children's books lined the lower tier, faded covers and bent spines. Something tugged at her memory, Finch muttering about hidden keys, Sedgwick's letter breaking off mid-word, as though silenced at the moment of discovery. She rose, pulling one volume free, The Wind in the Willows, its cover scuffed, its pages loose. Leafing through, her fingers paused at a section where the paper felt thicker. Carefully, she slit the binding. Inside lay a folded slip of parchment, smaller than the others, covered in the same strange hybrid symbols. "A cipher key," Tuppence whispered, "hidden in a children's book." Tommy leaned close. "Not the fragment itself, but instructions. Look, this one aligns the runes with shorthand marks. A legend to the puzzle." Triumph flickered, then dimmed. "If this is genuine," Tommy said softly, "then whoever hid it knew the code could indeed be solved." Their excitement was tempered by unease. When they returned to the hall, they found Finch loitering by the stairwell, his eyes fever-bright. He started when he saw them. "You've found something," he hissed. "I can see it in your faces. Don't trust it. Willow is poison. Burn it before it consumes us all." His voice rose until Sir Reginald appeared, cane tapping furiously. "Enough of this madness, Finch. If you cannot contain yourself, I shall confine you to your room." Finch slunk away, muttering, but Tuppence whispered to Tommy, He watches too closely. Perhaps he knows more than he lets slip. That night, the Beresfords examined the cipher key by candlelight in their chamber. Rain pattered softly against the windows, thunder distant. Shadows trembled on the walls as Tuppence held the slip close. "Look at this mark," she murmured. "It repeats beside certain runes. It must mean emphasis, perhaps vowels. And this, see how the shorthand aligns with numbers. A substitution pattern, surely." Tommy scribbled notes. Slowly, painfully, patterns began to emerge. Not full sentences, not yet, but glimpses. Words like betrayal, meeting, march. Tuppence shivered. These are not the words one hopes to find in a children's story. They worked until the candle burned low, but progress was halting. Each step forward revealed another tangle, and always the fear persisted that they were working on a fabrication, chasing shadows while the real key slipped away in someone else's hands. The next morning brought further unease. Sir Reginald reported that additional documents had gone missing, memoranda from his private safe relating to wartime intercepts. No lock was broken, no servant admitted entry. "It is as though the house itself conspires to be plundered," he growled. Tuppence thought of the butler, silent and watchful, and of Alice's nervous confession. Servants saw much. They were invisible until one looked. She took opportunity later to speak with the gardener, an old man with mud on his boots and a wary glance. He admitted seeing Markov walking the grounds at dawn, slipping near the outbuildings. When challenged, Markov claimed to admire the roses that had not bloomed in years. Red herrings multiplied. Who stole the memoranda? Who prowled the halls at night? Which fragments were real? Which counterfeit? Every clue pointed in two directions at once. Yet beneath it all, a dreadful certainty pressed. Someone in the house was racing toward completion of the cipher, and when it was finished, its secret might indeed be powerful enough to ruin nations. That evening, as Tommy and Tuppence conferred by the dwindling fire, the clock struck midnight with a hollow clang. Outside, the wind rose, rattling shutters. Tuppence drew her shawl tighter, her expression grave. "Darling," she said softly, "I fear we are nearly out of time. Someone is running ahead of us, piecing Willow together while we stumble in the dark." Tommy set down his notes. "Then we must stop stumbling. Tomorrow, we confront them, all of them. If Willow is to remain buried, or revealed, it will be on our terms, not theirs." The flames flickered low, casting long shadows that danced like spectres across the panelled walls. In those shadows lay treachery, lies, and perhaps the truth at last. The rain returned with fury the following night, lashing against the mullioned windows of Greystone Manor and seeping through the cracks in the old stone walls. Thunder rolled distantly, as if echoing the unrest festering within. The guests had become prisoners of suspicion, each one snapping more quickly, glancing more furtively. Tuppence, restless, wandered the upper corridors, her candle casting long, shivering shadows along the panelled walls. The house was hushed, save for the occasional groan of timbers and the hiss of rain. She had intended only to clear her mind, but curiosity drew her further, past locked doors and darkened chambers. At the head of the west staircase she paused. A draught whispered along the corridor, stirring her candle flame. She took a step and felt the world lurch beneath her. The stair groaned, splintered. With a cry she flung herself back, the candle tumbling from her hand. The top treads gave way with a sickening crack, collapsing into jagged ruin. Her knees shook, her palms scraped from where she caught herself against the wall. Heart hammering, she stared down into the yawning gap. Broken wood jutted like teeth, iron nails gleamed cruelly. Another step forward, and she would have been dashed to ruin. Tommy came running, Sir Reginald close behind. "Tuppence!" Tommy cried, pulling her to her feet. "I'm fine," she gasped, though her face was pale. But that was no accident. Sir Reginald's eyes darkened. Sabotage. The butler confirmed it moments later. Nails had been deliberately loosened, boards weakened. Someone had prepared the trap with methodical care. Tuppence steadied herself, her voice sharp. "It proves one thing. We are close to something someone desperately wishes us not to find." The household gathered again in the drawing room. The atmosphere was brittle, every word edged with accusation. Lady Eleanor demanded the servants be confined. Clara wept and insisted no one could wish them harm. Finch muttered about shadows in corners, while Markov's calm mask remained infuriatingly intact. Tuppence, seated near the fire, studied them all. The attack was clumsy, she said lightly, though her tone carried steel. But revealing. It tells us the killer is growing desperate, and desperation makes people careless. Her eyes lingered on Finch. He shifted uneasily, sweat beading his brow despite the chill. His muttering grew louder, words tumbling in half-coherent streams. Fragments, false fragments, all lies. Yes, yes, they plant them, they laugh at us. Tommy's gaze narrowed. You've known all along, haven't you, that some of the fragments were fabrications? Finch barked a laugh that cracked like glass. Of course I knew. They gave us poisoned meat to chew to see who swallowed. But you've been chasing shadows, and I fed you those shadows. The room stilled. Tuppence rose, voice ringing. Then it was you. You've been feeding us false leads, planting lies, guiding suspicion away from yourself. It was you who whispered that Willow was bait. You who told Harcourt to burn his notes. You've been playing both sides. Finch's eyes glittered. And why not? Truth and lies are the same coin. It only matters who spends them first. Sir Reginald's cane struck the floor. Treason. You betrayed us then. You betray us now. But Finch only smiled, a wild, broken smile. From his coat he drew 2 folded parchments, the fragments stolen in the night. Gasps rippled through the room. Clara clutched her handkerchief to her mouth. Markov leaned forward, interest flashing in his dark eyes. Finch's voice dropped to a hiss. With these the code is mine, and I will finish it before any of you old fools grasp its power. Before anyone could move, he bolted for the door. Chaos erupted. Tommy lunged, but Finch dodged, scattering a chair in his path. Tuppence darted after him, skirts catching against the carpet. Markov rose as though to follow, but Sir Reginald's cane swung sharply before him. "Sit, foreigner," Reginald barked. "This is our chase." Finch fled into the corridor, his footsteps pounding on stone. Tommy and Tuppence pursued, the others shouting behind. The manor seemed alive with echoes, slamming doors, rattling windows, the howl of wind through chimneys. They caught sight of him at the back hall, cloak snatched from a peg, candlelight flaring across his wild face. He hurled the door open and plunged into the rain. "After him!" Tommy cried. The night swallowed them. Rain sheeted down, blinding, turning gravel paths into rivers of mud. Finch's figure darted across the sodden garden, the parchment clutched tight against his chest. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the twisted trees and the glint of whetstone statues. Tuppence slipped, caught herself, and pressed on. Her breath came sharp, mingling with the hiss of rain. Ahead, Finch stumbled, regained his footing, and sprinted toward the outer wall. They cornered him near the garden gate. He turned, eyes blazing, breath ragged. "You think you can stop me?" he spat. "I've carried these secrets longer than you've lived, boy. I'll see them finished." "Finished where?" Tommy demanded. "Sold to Markov? To the highest bidder? Or to bury them forever in your madness?" Finch's laugh rang hollow. "It doesn't matter who pays, only that I hold the key." He thrust the parchments into his coat, then pulled a revolver from his pocket. The barrel gleamed in the lightning. Tuppence froze. Tommy raised his hands. "Think, Finch," Tommy said steadily. "If you kill us, you'll have every constable from here to London on your heels. You can't outrun the law forever." Finch's hand shook. Rain plastered his white hair to his skull. For an instant, doubt flickered across his face. Then a noise broke the tension, the creak of the garden gate. Markov stepped into the storm, umbrella useless in the gale, his smile cold. "Professor," he said softly, "surely you don't mean to keep such treasures to yourself. Let me relieve you of the burden." Finch snarled, swinging the revolver toward him. "Stay back." But the moment of distraction was enough. Tommy lunged, striking Finch's arm. The gun fired, the shot cracking like thunder. The bullet buried itself in the stone wall. The parchments flew from Finch's coat, snatched by the wind and rain. One skittered across the ground, the other was caught in a puddle, ink bleeding. Markov leapt for them, but Tuppence was quicker, scooping the nearest into her grasp. Finch shoved Tommy aside and bolted once more. this time through the gate and into the dark road beyond. The chase spilled onto the rain-slicked lanes outside the manor. Finch's figure flickered ahead, cloak whipping behind him. Tommy and Tuppence followed, their feet splashing in mud, lungs burning. The road curved sharply, bordered by high hedges that loomed like walls. Lightning flashed, revealing Finch's outline scrambling up the bank. He slipped, tumbled, then clawed his way upright. "Stop, Finch!" Tommy shouted. But the old man ran on, possessed by desperation. At the crossroads, a motorcar loomed, its lamps flaring sudden and blinding. Finch staggered into the beam, raising a hand. For a breathless instant, time seemed frozen. Then the car swerved violently, tires skidding on wet cobbles. Finch leapt aside, barely escaping the wheels. The driver shouted curses, then roared on into the night, leaving only exhaust and rain behind. Finch vanished down a side path, swallowed by hedgerows. Tommy and Tuppence halted, chests heaving. They had lost him. They returned, soaked and exhausted, to Greystone Manor. Markov awaited them in the hall, his coat damp but his expression smooth. "Unfortunate," he said. "The professor is cunning. He may yet finish what he began." Tuppence met his gaze coldly. "And you would like nothing better than to help him, if only to gain the fragments for yourself?" Markov smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But who can say? The game is not finished." He bowed slightly and withdrew. Tommy turned to Tuppence, voice low. "We've lost Finch, and with him the fragments. For the first time, I fear we are close to losing everything." Tuppence's grip on his arm tightened. "Not while we still breathe, darling. He cannot run forever, and the cipher will not crack itself." Outside, the rain beat harder, drowning the gardens in its relentless drum. Somewhere in the night, Finch clutched his stolen fragments, madness and triumph burning in his eyes. The chase was not over. It had only begun. The night wore on with relentless rain, drumming against the windows of Greystone Manor like 1,000 urgent fingers. The household had retired in uneasy fragments, Clara weeping into her handkerchief, Lady Eleanor pacing her chamber like a caged hawk, Sir Reginald muttering curses against the folly of inviting anyone at all. But Tommy and Tuppence did not sleep. They sat in their room, the fire burning low, poring over the battered parchment, Merryweather's notebook, and the strange cipher key discovered in the children's book. Words had begun to emerge through painstaking deduction: meeting, betrayal, march. But the meaning remained elusive, a jigsaw puzzle missing half its pieces. Tuppence set her pencil down at last and rubbed her eyes. "We're chasing phantoms, darling. Finch fled with fragments. Markov lurks like a cat near cream, and we— what have we? Save half a code and no solution." Tommy leaned back, pipe unlit between his teeth. "Perhaps the problem is that we keep trying to solve it. What if it was never meant to be solved?" Tuppence tilted her head. "Explain." "Think of Merryweather's note about false documents. Think of Finch's ravings. Willow may not have been a key to some treasure or secret plan. It may have been bait, a lure, meant to catch the disloyal." Tuppence's eyes widened. So anyone trying too hard to piece it together, anyone who believed in its promise, would reveal themselves by their very greed? Tommy nodded grimly. "Exactly. And Finch has revealed himself, more thoroughly than we could have hoped." A silence followed, broken only by the patter of rain and the slow tick of the mantel clock. Then came the knock. 3 short raps, hesitant. Tuppence rose and opened the door. It was Alice, the maid, her face pale, her apron damp with rain. "Begging your pardon, ma'am," she whispered, "but I saw him. The professor. He's gone to the old chapel on the hill. He was carrying lanterns and papers." The Beresfords exchanged a glance. Tommy seized his coat, Tuppence her umbrella. Within minutes they were out in the storm, following Alice's trembling directions. The path wound through sodden fields, rain sluicing down their collars, mud sucking at their boots. Lightning flashed, illuminating the silhouette of the chapel on its rise, a ruin from another century, its roof half fallen, its windows shattered, ivy clutching its stones like skeletal fingers. As they drew nearer, a glow flickered within, lantern light, steady and deliberate. "Shall we knock politely?" Tuppence murmured, though her tone was sharp. Let's simply call, Tommy said grimly. Inside, the chapel smelled of damp stone and old incense. Rain dripped through gaps in the roof, tapping onto broken pews. Finch had made a makeshift table from a fallen beam, and upon it he had spread the parchments, their ink glistening wet in the light of 2 lanterns. His spectacles glowed with manic intensity as he scribbled furiously. At the echo of footsteps he whirled. His revolver gleamed again in his trembling hand. "You," he hissed, "you won't stop me this time. The code is nearly done. Another hour, perhaps less, and Willow will be mine." Tuppence's voice cut like a bell. "Yours to do what with, Professor? Sell it to Markov, hide it in the ground, or simply prove that you are cleverer than your colleagues?" Finch's hand shook, but he kept the pistol trained on them. "You wouldn't understand. Years of ridicule, years of dismissal. They said I was a failure, that Willow was insoluble, but I saw the patterns. I saw the truth." Tommy stepped forward. "And the truth is that Willow was never meant to be solved. It was a decoy, Finch, a net to catch the greedy and the treacherous. Every time you pounced on a fragment, every time you whispered a clue, you proved the very thing they designed it for, that you were willing to betray." Finch's face contorted, a flicker of doubt breaking through the fever. "Lies. It's all lies. You're only jealous that I'm ahead of you." Tuppence spoke softly now, her voice threading into the storm's roar. "If that were true, Finch, why do the fragments contradict each other? Why do they yield nothing but half-words and nonsense? Because they were never whole. Because the code was the test, not the prize." Her words echoed against the cold stones, mingling with the drip of rain. Finch's lips moved soundlessly. His hand lowered an inch, the revolver wavering. "No, no, it can't be." It was then that Markov appeared, slipping through the broken doorway like a shadow made flesh. Rain gleamed on his dark coat. His smile was a blade. "Ah, Professor," he purred. "I think our friends are right. But no matter. Give me the papers and I will make them sing. Whether true or false, men will pay dearly to believe." He stepped forward, hand outstretched. Finch recoiled, wild again. "You shan't have them." Tommy and Tuppence moved at once. Tommy leapt toward Finch. Tuppence seized a lantern. The chapel exploded into chaos. Shouts, the crash of pews, the flare of lightning through shattered glass. Finch fired. The bullet struck stone, sparks flying. Markov lunged, grappling for the parchments. Tommy seized Finch's arm, wrestling for the revolver. The lantern slipped from Tuppence's grasp and smashed upon the stones. Flames licked hungrily at the damp floorboards, sputtering, then flaring with sudden strength. "Tommy!" Tuppence cried. "Get the papers!" he shouted back. Finch, shrieking, tore free and clutched the parchments to his chest. "They're mine! Mine!" But Tuppence was quicker. She darted forward, snatched one from his grasp, and flung it into the rising flames. It curled, blackened, and was gone. "No!" Finch howled, dropping to his knees to claw at the ashes. His revolver clattered from his hand. Markov saw his chance. He seized the remaining sheet and bolted for the door. But Tommy was ready. With a soldier's precision, he hurled a fallen beam across the threshold. Markov tripped, sprawling into the mud. The parchment flew from his hand. Tuppence pounced, snatching it before it could be lost to the storm. The flames roared higher, devouring pews, licking at the rafters. Smoke choked the air. Tommy dragged Finch upright, pinning his arms. The professor sagged, his madness broken, his strength spent. Tears streaked his rain-smeared face. "It was never real," he whispered hoarsely. "All these years, never real." "No," Tommy said firmly. "It was a trap, and you walked straight into it." Markov struggled to his feet, fury flashing in his eyes. But Sir Reginald appeared then, flanked by constables at last, their lamps bobbing like stars in the storm. "Enough!" the old man thundered. "This ends now." The constables seized Markov, cuffed Finch, and hustled both toward the door. The parchments, what remained of them, were gathered into Sir Reginald's leather case. The chapel roof groaned. Sparks rained from above. "Out!" Tuppence cried, "before it buries us all!" They fled into the night as the roof collapsed behind them. Flames billowing upward, sparks vanishing into the storm. By dawn the chapel was a blackened shell. Smoke drifted across the fields, mingling with the last tatters of rain. The Beresfords stood with Sir Reginald upon the hillside, weary but resolute. "It is finished," Reginald said, voice heavy. "Willow lies in ashes, as it should have done long ago." Tuppence glanced at the single surviving fragment sealed in the case. "And yet, one piece remains. Do you mean to destroy it?" Sir Reginald shook his head. "No. It shall go where it belongs, into the deepest vaults of Whitehall, marked as false, never again to tempt the ambitious. Let it rot among the dust." Tommy slipped an arm around Tuppence's shoulders. "And so the cipher that could never be broken remains unbroken." Tuppence smiled faintly, though her eyes were tired. "And never was meant to be. It wasn't a puzzle at all, but a mirror held up to the hearts of men. Finch saw glory, Markov saw profit, and so they revealed themselves." "And you, Mrs. Beresford?" Sir Reginald asked. "I saw," she said softly, "that secrets are only dangerous when we give them power, and that, when all is said and done, a code cannot ruin nations. Only people can." As the constables led Finch and Markov away, the Beresfords turned back toward the manor. The rain had ceased, the first light of morning breaking through ragged clouds. The path ahead was slick with mud, but it glowed faintly in the pale dawn. Tommy offered his hand. "Come along, partner. Another case cracked, or at least left delightfully unsolved." Tuppence slipped her hand into his. "Until the next cipher, darling. Though perhaps next time, let it be one in a crossword rather than a crumbling chapel." They laughed, weary but together, their steps steady as they walked toward the waiting day. The storm was over, the game of Willow was done, and the cipher that could never be broken had fulfilled its purpose, not in revelation but in betrayal unmasked, secrets exposed, and truth, at last, brought into the light. The clatter and turmoil of Greystone Manor faded into memory as the Beresfords returned to their modest house on South Audley Street, a snug haven tucked into a quiet London street. The contrast could not have been sharper. Gone were the draughty corridors, the mutter of fearful guests, the smell of damp stone and old secrets. Instead, the familiar warmth of their own hearth greeted them, the ticking of their mantel clock, and the reassuring rattle of the kettle on the hob. Fritz, ever unflappable, met them at the door with only the faintest arch of his brow. "I trust your excursion was successful, madame, sir?" he asked with his usual understatement. "Successful enough," Tommy said, shrugging out of his damp coat, "though I'd not recommend Greystone as a holiday retreat." Tuppence tossed her hat onto the stand and gave Fritz a smile. "You needn't worry. We've returned with all our limbs intact, though only just." Moments later, the two of them were settled in their favourite chairs by the fire. The tea tray gleamed on the low table, steam curling from the pot. Outside, London's autumn drizzle pressed against the windows, but here there was only the glow of flame and the promise of peace. Tuppence sighed with contentment, wrapping her hands around her cup. "You know, Tommy, there's nothing quite like our own hearth after a brush with death. Sabotage staircases, poisoned tea, and crumbling chapels are all very well, but I prefer solid floorboards and a decent brew." Tommy smiled faintly. "I've come to the conclusion that ciphers are vastly overrated, particularly ones that were never meant to be solved." Tuppence tilted her head, studying him. "It's rather poetic, don't you think? An unbreakable code, not because it was too clever, but because it was a decoy, a trap laid to reveal character rather than meaning." He nodded, gazing into the fire. Harcourt, Finch, Markov, all undone not by Willow's brilliance but by their own flaws. Pride, greed, desperation. That was the true code, and they spelled it out clearly enough. Tuppence leaned back, her eyes thoughtful. "And yet, I can't help but pity Finch. All those years, chasing ghosts, believing he was on the verge of triumph. To discover it was all an illusion. It must have broken something deep inside him." Tommy's voice softened. "Pity, yes, but he chose his path. Willow was a mirror, and what he saw was what he carried all along. Betrayal doesn't come from symbols on a page. It comes from people." The fire crackled, logs settling into embers. Silence stretched companionably between them, filled only by the comforting tick of the clock and the occasional clink of china. At last Tuppence said, with a sudden smile, "Do you suppose we'll ever have a peaceful season again? A little knitting, a little gardening, perhaps a holiday by the sea, without ciphers, corpses, or conspiracies?" Tommy chuckled. "You'd be bored within a week." She laughed, conceding the point. "Perhaps. There's something to be said for mystery. It keeps the mind sharp, the blood flowing." "And," Tommy added, "it keeps us together. Nothing tests partnership like running across rain-slicked roads after a mad professor with a pistol." Tuppence raised her cup in mock salute. "To partnership, then." He clinked his cup against hers. "To partnership." They lingered long over their tea, letting the warmth seep into their bones. Outside, the drizzle deepened into rain, soft against the glass. The world, for the moment, was safely distant. It was just as Tuppence reached for the plate of shortbread that the post arrived, dropped through the slot with its usual brisk rattle. Fritz, efficient as ever, brought the small stack of envelopes and laid them on the side table. "Nothing urgent, I trust," Tommy murmured, not eager to trade the fire for paperwork. Tuppence sifted idly through the pile. A bill, a circular, a letter from an old friend. Then she froze. At the bottom lay a postcard. Its front showed a harmless seaside scene, children paddling in shallow water, a donkey plodding patiently along the sand. Quaint, ordinary, utterly unremarkable. But the back, her fingers tightened. Instead of words, symbols sprawled across the card. Strange runes mixed with shorthand strokes, the same markings they had seen on Sedgwick's parchment. Tommy looked over her shoulder. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled, the rain whispered. At last Tuppence said softly, "Well, it seems Willow is not quite buried after all." Tommy's mouth tightened, but his tone remained calm. "Or perhaps it's nothing more than a prank. Someone amused themselves with newspaper clippings and ink." Tuppence slipped the postcard onto the table, face down, as though hiding it could dim its power. "Prank or not, it proves one thing. Mystery has a way of finding us, whether we go looking for it or not." Tommy reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Then let it come. Whatever tomorrow brings, be it knitting, gardening, or another cipher, we'll face it together." She smiled, the unease fading but never vanishing entirely. "Together, darling. Always together." The clock chimed the hour, steady and reassuring. The fire burned low, the rain pattered on. In their quiet sitting room, the Beresfords sipped their tea, savouring warmth, partnership, and the knowledge that somewhere beyond their cosy walls, the world still held shadows waiting to be unmasked. And on the table, the postcard lay silent, its strange symbols a reminder that truth and doubt often travel hand in hand.